Okay, my name's Marianne. I'm from the Burnett Institute in Melbourne, and I'm also on the RDI board. So very excited to have you all here. We haven't had a conference since 2021, so thank you so much for joining us. So this is the last session of the day, and before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation upon the ancestral lands that we're standing here today, and pay our respects to their elders past and present, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of knowledge for these lands. Okay, to begin with, I would like to introduce everyone to Kathy Beloff. Kathy, there you are. Come up to the front. So Kathy is the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Global and Research Engagement at the University of Sydney, and the University of Sydney is one of our gold sponsors. So thank you so much, Kathy, for your support. And this last session will be hearing all about navigating the tides, which for me is very, very applicable to the ebb and flow and adapting international development. So I look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks so much, Marianne. Can you all hear me? I don't think this one's working. Hi. Look, I would also like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, on whose lands we meet today. They have been teaching and learning on these lands, doing research for many, many tens of thousands of years. And we have so much to learn from our local Indigenous people. And I think it's just good to reflect on that as we launch into this session, as we're also going to be thinking about and talking about the important role that Indigenous people play and have played for many, many tens of thousands of years. I hope you're really enjoying the conference. You know, we're very proud to have been able to sponsor it, and I think it's fantastic to see the types of conversations that are coming out of this meeting. But I'm going to start off on a bit of a downer, because I think it goes without saying now that Australia has really been guilty of neglecting its relationship with our neighbours in the Pacific for far too long. For far too long, we as a community have thought of the Pacific as a fantastic holiday destination, a great source of rugby players, but we've neglected our diplomatic and economic attention, and that attention has been elsewhere. So for too long, we've ranked shockingly as the worst performing developed country for meaningful climate action. And yet our neighbours on the Pacific Islands are in the front line of the threats posed by climate-induced sea level rise. So hopefully we've learnt from our past mistakes. And I know the Australian government has released its Pacific Regional Development Program, showing a step in the right direction. And while the government is rectifying or amending those years of neglect, I think there's an urgent need for our universities to step into the gap, to strengthen our research and education and training partnerships in the Pacific, to foster regional collaboration and support sustainable development. And that's certainly our intention at the University of Sydney. And that's why today's conference is so important to us, so that we can all share our knowledge and experience and learn from each other. Because let's face it, we've made mistakes too. Australian universities, on the whole, have interacted far too little with their counterparts in the Pacific. And I think we've all fallen into the trap of thinking that just because the government funding wasn't forthcoming, our research focus should be elsewhere. But enough of the negatives. I won't focus on the negatives. Let's think about the positives. From my perch, where I sit in the Office of Global and Research Engagement at the University of Sydney, I know that all Australian universities have a wealth of talent in areas that are vitally important to the Pacific region. I'm talking about things like climate change, health, and sustainable development. So it's great to see my colleagues up here on the stage. We've got people who are really dedicated and committed to working with people in the Pacific to really make a difference. I won't introduce them fully, but I will say we've got Eleanor Bruce, who's the UNESCO Chair in Marine Science, Aaron Jenkins, Associate Professor in Planetary Health, Pani Patu from the Roche Centre for Indigenous Health, and Corinne Kalau from the Faculty of Health Science. And I'll talk about Joel in a minute. I haven't forgotten Joel. There are two important points that I want to make first. One is that our researchers sitting up here all have years of experience working with communities in the Pacific in a way that directly improves people's lives. And as one of my colleagues pointed out, they don't do research on the region, they work alongside and with the region. And the second point, and I'm sure this is true for all Australian researchers, is they approach their work in the spirit of reciprocity, equity, and partnership. The way in which we go about our engagement, the values that we bring to our work, and critically important in terms of breaking down barriers and helping us to understand the priorities and concerns of Pacific Islanders. In helping us to understand that if you live on a Pacific island, climate change and good health are far more important than geopolitical chicanery. So with that thought, I hope you enjoy this session. I hope you share and acquire useful knowledge and make some lasting connections. And now it is my pleasant duty to hand over to another one of my colleagues, Joel Nagin. Joel is Professor of Public Health who has a strong interest in capacity building in the Asia Pacific. Joel has worked for many years with partners in Fiji to reduce the threat posed by waterborne diseases such as leptospirosis and typhoid, a major challenge for Pacific Island countries. So over to you, Joel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Thank you, Marianne. It's wonderful to be here. I was on the RDI board many, many years ago, so it's very nice to kind of come back to this and have the conference organized again. So thank you to Marianne and the other organizers, and thank you to the University of Sydney for co-sponsoring. So last session of the day, people might be a bit tired. It's very windy out there, but we're going to try and build some energy in this room. We're going to have 4 wonderful speakers sharing their perspectives, but then we are going to have an opportunity to throw it back to the group to share reflections, ask questions, and engage on this topic. This is really one that is about how do we work together, as Kathy said, how do we create those structures of reciprocity and collaboration, and that's what we want to focus on today. I'm going to introduce my colleagues quite quickly. They each gave me very long bios, but I'm going to refer you to websites to get their long bios. We're going to do a slightly shorter version because you want to hear their experiences, not necessarily their CVs. So I'll try and highlight some relevant information, then we'll jump into some questions. In terms of format, I'm going to ask the panel a handful of questions, and then we're going to open it up for some discussion and reflection. And then at the end at 5 o'clock, we have a bit of an exercise as a day one share and connect dice-based reflection process, which I don't fully understand, but we're going to go for it anyway. Urging you to stay at 5 o'clock. Okay, so first starting on your far left, I think it is, if I got my directions right, is Professor Eleanor Bruce, who, as Kathy mentioned, is a UNESCO Chair in Marine Science and is co-director of the University of Sydney Marine Studies Institute. And her research focuses on understanding coastal system response to climate variability. Next is my friend and collaborator for a long time, Tuile Lepa Paniani Patu, who is now the operations manager of the Post Center for Indigenous Health. We all call him Pani. The Post Center is a flagship research center within the University of Sydney's Faculty of Medicine and Health that focuses on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander thriving. He's been working in the tertiary sector for more than 10 years and really focuses on education and research that honor Pacifica ways of knowing and being. He holds deep genealogical ties to the Samoan villages of Moataa, Vialala, Safune, and Lotofaga, and his work is grounded in Samoan values of alofa, love, whaiosiai, reciprocity, and tau, which is service, and is centered on nurturing the va, the sacred relational space that connects and sustains relationships. Next is Professor Corinne Kayao, who is Professor of Lifestyles and Digital Health in the Faculty of Medicine and Health University of Sydney. And she focuses on using digital solutions to tackle health challenges faced by Pacific adolescents, including navigating a digital world and adapting to climate change. Her work in the Pacific extends to New Caledonia, Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, and Fiji. And then next to me here is Associate Professor Aaron Jenkins, who grew up in PNG and is now a Fijian citizen. And he's one of Australia's leading scholars and one of the world's leading scholars in planetary health, an emerging field that examines how environmental change impacts human health. He holds a prestigious Sydney Horizon Fellowship focused on watershed management and health resilience in the Pacific, and his current work is in Fiji, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands. So that's the bios. So lots of experience here, but we don't want to talk about their CV. We want to hear how they work in the region, what type of collaboration they create. So the first question, we're going to start with Eleanor over there on my right. For each of you to briefly describe your work and how it connects with Pacific communities, and to reflect on what does working with and for Pacific communities mean to you in practice. Eleanor.
Thanks, Joel. So I'm a coastal scientist, and as Joel said, I look at the impact of climate stresses on our coastlines. I mainly look at the biophysical processes, but I work on interdisciplinary projects that also look at the impacts to coastal livelihood security. So I have worked on projects in Fiji, in Tonga, and in Vanuatu with collaborators in country, but funded through the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, APN, so the Asia Pacific Network, and DFAT, and have been working in the Pacific for about 8 years. There are a lot of lessons that I learnt along the way, but I feel it's been an absolute privilege to have had that opportunity to do that work. So I guess I would give an example of a project that I think really had some interesting outcomes. We worked in Fiji and Tonga developing, so my background is also in using spatial technologies and satellite data and ways of mapping the landscape. But it was really important not just to take that technology in, but to work really closely with the government stakeholders and government partners. So we partnered really closely with, in Tonga, the Ministry for Agriculture, Food and Forestry. And they were really keen to develop this platform because their challenge was to try and understand the role of agricultural diversity in low-lying coastal areas and how that may improve or support resilience. So traditionally, they would go out and collect all this data by paper across the very vast archipelago, and then it would take almost 12 months for that paper data to come back. So the idea was to develop a geospatial platform, so something that could be accessed open source, online, and by all of the agriculture and conservation extension officers working on these, dealing with these problems. So over, of course, we spent a lot of time working also with communities and just trying to understand the challenges that they face. And we developed a platform during COVID, and we trained many people in country as well at the same time, and they then collected all the data, and their objective was to collect all of this information, and it was done at a very granular level. So information on what crops were grown, what they were impacted, how they were impacted by things like saltwater incursion, the level of water, irrigation, fertilizer, and that was all collected in December 2021. And if you can remember what happened at the beginning of 2022, so that meant that MAF had all of that data. They didn't need to access it from any other organization. It was all in the cloud, but it was also on their own servers. So they could do a quick, rapid disaster response within days to understand which households and which farmers were affected, how to allocate resources and things like that. Oh, is that not on?
It is.
It is on. Yes, sorry. I hope you can hear me. So that was just one case study that, was an interesting outcome of what came across. Just wave if I'm not very good with microphones. I always tilt it like that. Yeah, thanks. So the other question related to, what we how I interpret working with. I think it was really important that we were, from the very beginning of the inception phase of the project, that we're working with our partners in country and also working really closely with communities to understand their resources, their incredible resilience to some of the climate stresses that they were working with, and that helped shape the design of our research project.
Thank you. Pani?
After lava Joe, momono fatalo fatu pa ia man mamalu au fia poto mai ne a fia fi. I think it's always important as a Pacific person to ground myself in place and amongst people. And so I just want to start, if I could, by also acknowledging the traditional custodians on this land, the Gadigal people, the Eora Nation. As a Pacific person, we tend to start by acknowledging, out of respect, those around us. And so I also extend that out to any Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander peoples with us today. I acknowledge that I also am a child of the Pacific and want to extend that acknowledge and respect to elders in the room. I acknowledge your chiefly titles. I acknowledge your honorifics. And as a place of relationality, which is something that I've grown up with and been taught, it's informed my worldview and how I approach people, but also approach my work, which I think, unlike my other fellow panelists, is slightly different in terms of how I interact with research. My substantive role is as an operations manager for a flagship research centre. And so my contribution to research is probably more around facilitating processes and strategic planning, but also around governance. And I have the privilege of working in a space, quite a sacred space within the university, that is, as my bio suggested, looking at how we can promote health equity within the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander space. Our proximity with First Nations people in this land is important to acknowledge. As part of my role, I had the privilege of travelling to Aotearoa, New Zealand last year, where we attended the Indigenous Wellbeing Conference. And through that, we identified a number of shared experiences that, from a trans-Indigenous research perspective, was quite enlightening, and also offered a place of opportunity for shared learning, both within the Australian context, but also how it helps and supports the Pacific. And so engagement through learnings from our First Nations peoples and colleagues here, I think, is a good place to start, and something that I've been developing in my work. I also wear the hat of I sit on the executive board for the Australian Pacifica Educators Network. We're a national community-based organisation looking at advocacy of Pacifica learners within Australia, but I think something to recognise is understanding that the Pacific extends also to those that have migrated out of the Pacific and living in diasporic communities in places like Australia and New Zealand. And so when I think of Pacific communities, I also think of Pacific peoples that are living in diaspora. And so that's where a lot of my work has been focused. We did some desktop research looking at ABS data, comparing population trends from 2021 ABS data. There were some significant insights there that we gleaned around the way that Pacific peoples move, and naturally there was an increase in populations and clusters across the country, but also the impact things like labour mobility schemes, foreign aid and development have on the movement of Pacific peoples, not just across the Pacific, but within Australia. The second part of the question, my perspective on how we can work for and with Pacific communities. I often think about my own Pacific values and how we nurture the relational space, or what we call the VA in Samoa. It's a very relationship-driven process and one that's grounded in community-driven inquiry. I think for me, honouring that relationality is important, and perhaps later when we talk a little bit about some of the values that we should be exploring as researchers, we can unpack that a little bit further.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Corinne Caillot. I'm not someone who's from the Pacific. I was born and grew up in Morocco. I'm French by background. I came to the Pacific 20 years ago now, and my son is born in Australia, so he's born in the Pacific. But I feel a very strong connection being here 20 years with the Pacific region. And I've been working in the Pacific Islands for 10 years now. So before I get started to say more, I also would like to acknowledge the Gadigal from the Eora Nation and all of the Indigenous communities and young people with which I've been working in the past 10 years. So in terms of my work connected with the Pacific, started around 10 years ago. And this work has amazingly developed. I'm an exercise scientist by background. And my first inquiry was really around physical activity and exercise in the Pacific and lifestyles. When you get to travel and to talk to people and to start to understand context, you realize how much your question is so much bigger than that. So I guess working in the Pacific and with the Pacific people and communities and young people has really the first consequence completely extended the scope of my research, the different methodologies I would use to work, and the network and the connections I've made over time. So now I actually co-lead a node, which is called Pacific Adolescents Health and Innovation Hub at the Charles Perkins Centre, the University of Sydney. And I co-lead this node and network with my colleague Olivier Galli from the University of New Caledonia. So it's embedded in already 2 countries in the Pacific, and we aim to extend the co-leadership of this network across different countries. Within the network and the different countries we've been engaging with, I can name New Caledonia, of course, with the mainland, but the people from the Loyalty Islands as well, mostly Lifu, and the Jiu people. People from Vanuatu, in Ifati and Santo, Solomon Islands, mostly in Honiara, and more recently, Fiji, and very recently, as per last week, we started to engage with people in Papua New Guinea. So one of the main projects we are doing as part of this network is called the APY project, Australia Pacific Youth Project, which is really trying to empower young people to take actions and to act for the health in their context. You can see that the name is Australia Pacific because we have, I guess, a strong belief that we're all connected in the Pacific, Pacific nations and Australia and New Zealand. And I think, as Kathy said, there's maybe big responsibility to really connect more and be aware of who we are and where we are situated. I also was the lead for a big European project called FALA, Family Farming, Lifestyles and Health in the Pacific. And it's important to note the European in the FALA and the project, because actually to implement those big projects in the Pacific, the University of Sydney partner with the University of New Caledonia to attract European funding. So hopefully there will be more opportunities in the future to partner with Europe in terms of funding research in the Pacific. Now, in terms of how I understand the work I do in collaborating with Pacific people, I guess I'm going to tell you a story. So the first project we implemented in the Pacific, which was in Lifu, as part of New Caledonia, was really to implement a digital health program for young people that was talking about physical activity and diets and used digital tablets and wearables. And of course, it was informed by research. That research came mostly from Western countries. It was also informed by data collected by my colleague in New Caledonia. And it was informed by researchers from New Caledonia, from LIFU, Indigenous researchers, and previous conversations with the communities and the school community. So here we go. We arrive in LIFU, all ready to implement the project. And then we again engage with the community to signal we are around and the project is about to start. And then people got curious and asked again about what the project was about. So we showed them the digital platform with all of the design inspired by Pacific countries, mostly New Caledonia. And they started to play with the wearables and asking questions. And then suddenly, everybody provided feedback and suggested that maybe, so the spiritual leader suggested that he could do a video NGO to inspire the children and talk about food and physical activity. And someone else said, oh, if you want, the physical education teacher was from the community, said, I can make a few videos to demonstrate exercise. And some older students in the school suggested they could do videos. And we were like, well, we're starting tomorrow. What do we do? And what we had done, and that was, I think, a very good idea, is that we had also invited our industry partner who was actually designing and coding the digital solution. And we talked to him and we said, well, that would be amazing if we could actually embed those videos and this new content in the platform. So we did it, and that was amazing in the way the children connected with their community through the platform. Absolutely amazed that their language was used in the platform and that all the kids were involved. So I think what I've learned is that engaging with the community and talking with people never stops. And if you do that, you have to be ready to change things last minute and to have all your team on their toes to do that. And it completely changed the way I'm doing research. It's bringing the narrative, not just at one point, but along the way with the project. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Aaron Jenkins. I must acknowledge the people of this place, the Gadigal people. And all one talk blomi stop lo PNG me look at me and all of our colleagues and friends here. So my background is I was born in the US, actually in Memphis, Tennessee, the same hospital as Elvis. And I have a strange ancestry of Russian, Irish, and Cherokee Indian. And when I was in about 4th grade, my parents moved to Papua New Guinea on a 2-year contract to work for the Papua New Guinea Institute of Medical Research and ended up staying for 18 years. And so essentially my formative years were spent in PNG, wandering the halls of the PNG IMR, and where I've just returned from last week, which was fabulous. And I think just thinking about the things that are resonating as we're talking, this idea of relationality and the fact that everything is relational. And in order to do work empathetically, to do work that's meaningful and lasting, that it needs to be one based in place and that it based on relationships, genuine relationships. And that doesn't come from, fly in, fly out kind of mentality. That comes from spending time and being deeply embedded in place. And so what was the second part of the question?
How do you work with and for?
With and for, right. Maybe I'll also give a little bit of a story. So our primary work, research work at the moment is a large program of work called Watershed Interventions for Systems Health, which is the WISH program of work. And that's very much located in place, and those places are the boundaries of a watershed or a river basin or a catchment, however you might say. And so those boundaries are not politically drawn, they're geomorphologically drawn by the earth. And it's where water flows across the land. How we manage those particular spaces in place helps to determine the health and well-being of the system as a whole. And that includes the people that are there, that includes the animals that are there, that includes the minerals that are there. And so working with and for is always going to be based in the place in which you're working. The lived experience of the people and the life that is there obviously knows more about that than you coming in from the outside. So I think my experience of working in place is one that all knowledges are valid. And secondly, that without place-based knowledge informing the way that you work, you're not going to make good headway. So I think I'll just leave it there so we don't go too much. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to ask a few more questions of the panel, and then we'll have some time to open it up for other reflections from the room. But Pani, I wanted to come back to you. You mentioned values, and I want to kind of dig a little bit more into that. What values should underpin a university's work in the Pacific?
Yeah, and I think some of the panelists have already touched on these values in their work, and like what Aaron was saying, approaching communities with respect, I think, is of utmost importance and foundational to that relationship building process that can often, done wrong, derail the research, and done right, lead to really, really fruitful and positive outcomes. Respect is an interesting concept in the Pacific, and from where I come from in Samoa, respect, we call it fa'aloalo. It's how you move, it's how you speak, it's in the unspoken, it's in the spoken, and so it requires that place-based knowledge and understanding and privileging that those knowledge systems from a place of respect. Again, from my own Samoan experience, you could be smacked on the head by walking in the wrong way or walking in front of the wrong person, or not at a height that is, considered respectful. And so these are intrinsic to the functioning of our societies. And I think as researchers, it's important to, and as institutions with interest in the Pacific, it's important to be understanding of that value. So respect is one. Another R that comes to mind, and these are 4 R's, so bear with me. The other R that comes to mind is reciprocity, and you touched on that in your opening statement, Joel. I think reciprocity from a Pacific standpoint is imbued in this idea of, again, relationality, but also in that an understanding that there are individuals are not just individuals, but part of a wider collective and part of community. And so what are you, in addition to your research, doing for that wider community and that wider collective? Is it capacity building? Is it added infrastructure? I think, is it data sovereignty? Is it intellectual property? Are these things you're considering in how you're building your research design from the get-go? And I think the beauty is that community will tell you if, you know, and so having that conversation up front in the, you know, establishment or co-creation or however you want to describe it is a way in which I think you can approach reciprocity. The third R, reflexivity, and this is, I feel, one of the things that gets lost often in our endeavour for research and meaningful research is understanding our own positionality and privilege in space. I, as a settler on these lands, need to recognise what privilege that imbues me here in Australia. And so that critical reflexivity, understanding your positionality as a researcher, whether you're Pacific or non-Pacific, or I think there's a generosity that comes by doing that, and a recognition of that community. They see it really well. And the last that I'll end with is relationality, which I think we've spoken to already. All of these things build a relationship that for Samoans, we love to continue, and that continuity of relationship is something really important to us. You know, it shifts the relationship from being, you know, that benevolent benefactor to being a long-term partner and a long-term family member, which we consider to be, you know, very important. So if I can leave with four, maybe that's, I thought of this before I got here, and I thought maybe if I did that 4 hours, maybe that's a good way. There are other principles that I think drive meaningful research in the Pacific, but yeah, those to me in the Samoan context, I think quite meaningful.
That's great. Well, hopefully people got the 4 R's and they can remember them as a block. That'd be great. Corinne, I wanted to go to you. Wondering if you could reflect on some examples where Pacific-led knowledge or leadership helped reshape the direction of a project, helped kind of steer it in a way that ended up working out for the best.
Yes, well, actually, the APY project, the Australian Pacific Youth Project, is an example. So this is a project. Initially, the team is multidisciplinary, and we have researchers from Sydney, from New Caledonia, and from Vanuatu. This was the beginning of this project. And what we wanted to do is to have a methodology that would allow us to engage with young people in a way that would take into account, you know, respect, reciprocity, ethical relationships as well. I mean, understanding what it means. And so what we did is we leveraged the fact that the University of Sydney is a partner in this FALA project. And we actually, as a team, so not just one person, but several persons from the team, attended pretty much all of the workshops and seminars that were held in the different Pacific countries over the past 2 years. And we used this forum to share our initial ideas and to discuss the methodology that could be used to implement this project. And that was insightful, and all of the leaders in the room, which could be, these leaders could be researchers, community leaders, teachers, farmers, some young people as well, helped us to design the methodology. And we ended up with having a methodology that is a participatory research methodology, in which we engage with a group of people through stories and scenarios. So when we engage, we would start with a story. And this story is followed by questions. And young people, aged between 13 and 17 years old, work as a group of 4 students discussing within themselves and answering those questions. And so these methodologies is very interesting because the framework is built to let people have a voice that is, I think, minimally influenced by the researchers in the room, even if, you know, we design the scenario, we co-design the scenario. I mean, there's always influences, but they can work them as themselves as a group, and they can just flourish around their ideas. And another very important point was that people said, well, why answering a question has to be in writing? And so they said, you know, sometimes a drawing can tell a lot. So we enabled participants to write or draw their answers. And it's been absolutely amazing to see the kind of drawings that these young people were able to produce to express their ideas. And then, of course, we had to develop a new methodology to analyze the drawings. It's another story, maybe. So I think really what we've learned is how, I mean, it's been completely shifting the way I do research, with much more qualitative research embedded in the research before you even try to collect maybe any quantitative data, if needed, because stories tell a lot. And yes, it's been really amazing around those lines. And this methodology works everywhere. Like, we've tried it in Australia and different Pacific islands.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I'd like to continue with that, Erin, and talk a little bit more about how you've approached co-design in your work. Corinne's just kind of given us an example of finding a co-design method and an engagement method, but wondering if you could speak to that as well.
Sure. So, you know, let me just talk about the work in Fiji. So we're working with 29 communities in Fiji in 5 different river basins, or watersheds, as you may call them. And when we began the project, we were approached by the Itauke Affairs, which is the Indigenous Affairs group. And they said, you know, we've just started this this new policy, and it's about free, prior, and informed consent. And we said, yes, that's important, absolutely. And so, do you have any, you know, recommendations? And they said, no, we haven't designed it. So, you know, would you like to? You guys can help us co-design this process. So in planetary health work, where you know, there are interventions that are happening at the scale of watersheds, such as replanting trees, interventions happening at community levels, such as, you know, fencing off livestock, fixing water and sanitation, and so forth. These are things that affect the whole community, let alone the whole watershed. So then how, you know, in a very, you know, biomedical sense, people, the free and prior informed consent is very individual. How do you get the consent at a community level, or when you have a whole community to do that? So our approach has been really to follow traditional Itauke protocol in the way that we approach villages, and to sit and co-design the work at different levels. So firstly at the level of the national level, and then at provincial level, and then in the village level, we're working with and co-designing the whole process right from the very beginning. I think I was thinking about this earlier, it should really be called free, prior, and co-designed and continuing consent, because one is that it's always changing. So you don't have it, once off and then it's all good. It has to be a continuing process. And then, so to make a long story short, we've spent about 5 months, 4 or 5 months, just in the process of drinking lots of kava and sitting down telling stories about, the work that we had kind of envisioned, but then, learning how that might work or might not work in the context of every single place. And that changes with every single place. And so, I mean, I think that approach is absolutely necessary because, in such a diverse region as the Pacific, every single place is different from village to village, from each village, like the upper part of the village to the bottom part of the village is different, and every clan has their own viewpoint on things, and so yeah, that whole co-design process is the key to doing good development work.
So it's an outcome in and of itself.
Yeah.
Eleanor, and this is kind of builds off this, but your universities have their research benefits, but wondering if you could reflect on how research benefits are shared equitably with communities beyond some of the traditional university-friendly metrics.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question and an important one too. And it links in with what the other panelists have said. Pani mentioned the importance of connections that are longer term, not just the life cycle of one project, and the importance of actually spending time through participatory style methodologies to really understand what's going on in these communities, and to also make sure that, often we go in thinking, oh, we need that scientific permit, got that ticked off. We need ethics approval, got that ticked off. But in actual fact, it can take a year or more of a research project to really understand, to make sure that you have the permission of the communities that you're working in, and that can differ depending on where you are, and to make sure that the project has relevance and will, have outcomes that are way beyond research papers and policy impacts. So I guess the example I would give is the work that we did in Bar in Viti Levu in Fiji and in Tonga and Vavau. So we spent time the first year of the project really trying to work with the communities and understand what their concerns are in terms of climate stress and impacts of sea level rise, saltwater incursion on their agricultural lands. And we did that using things like participatory mapping and understanding how they sort of understand and manage that landscape and care for that landscape. And also we use an approach called causal loop diagrams, where you, through discussions, you're understanding the communities are putting their core concern and their core problem in the front of that causal loop, and then they identified. So if the problem was a decline in reef fish catch, what was causing that and what the implications were as far as, what that meant in terms of getting children to school and affording books and things like that, when you're seeing a decline in household income because of a decline in fish, and then linking that whole loop back and what that actually meant. So that then informed and shaped the way we designed the project, which was really fortunate because we only had a year before COVID travel restrictions kicked in big time. So then, but we had that information, and it meant that at the end of the project, or even during COVID, we could use the platforms to determine things like, so in Vavau, access to fuel was a really big issue during COVID restrictions. And so we could use these mapping tools to actually work out which farmers were most impacted by that, if there was fallow land that could actually be used for subsistence farming during that period where cargo vessels weren't getting in, where fuel could be allocated. So there were sort of immediate benefits. And that was, we weren't able to travel there, but it meant that our colleagues that we were working with in the ministry were actually able to meet communities in town, town hall meetings, and convey that information. So I guess that's just one example of how we sort of took that one step further.
Thank you. I just have one more question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So if you do have reflections or questions, please get them ready. But Pani, I just wanted to ask you something that we've talked about before. In terms of research methods, culturally grounded research methods, what have you used or encountered that you think would work? And we've talked a bit about yarning in the Australian context and Talanoa in the Fijian context, but how do we make sure we're using those well and right and not just as I chatted to a couple people, therefore that's a method? You want to speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as Aaron had mentioned, that there needs to be an understanding of place-based context, and that methodology may vary across the Pacific. A number of Pacific scholars have developed Pacific grounded methodology, Talanoa being one of them, that's grounded in cultural expressions in various parts of the Pacific, including Samoa and Tonga. And these methodological approaches center community voice, can be done in a way that you can use it for co-design, you can use it for qualitative inquiry. There's some really rich data that you can gain and glean from pan-Pacific methodologies such as Talanoa. Talanoa in the Pacific colloquially is just a casual conversation, but you can also use it in research practice where how you establish the room, how you place people in how you place people in space. Talanoa enables not just the participants, but also the researchers to co-theorize or co-develop ideas and understandings. And interestingly, I often, something that comes up as we talk about Pacific methodologies is this seemingly tensionist with academic rigor, you know, and that it that there is an assumption that it is not as rigorous as you know, hegemonic Western notions of research. And I think it's important as part of all of this is to really unpack what is rigorous. Is it maintaining structural controls and protocols, or is it kind of moving with the cultural cadences that may take longer? It may extend timelines, may extend budgets. And so I think being able to, using Pacific methodologies, grounding your research in Pacific methodologies such as Talanoa, such as Vanua in Fiji, such as Kakala in Tonga, really enables meaningful engagement when it comes to research.
Thank you. Do you want to open it up and see if people not necessarily have questions, but reflections, shared experience that they might want to bring to the group? Anyone want to jump in? Thank you.
Hi, my name's Anna Guerrero. I'm currently a PhD candidate at Griffith University, but I've worked for 14 years here at the Institute for Sustainable Futures at UTS on Pacific climate change research. Thanks so much for a great panel. A bit of a niche question, but picking up on the research ethics topic that's just been talked about. And it's something that's occurred to me through my PhD, but also my research at ISF is around, we've got university ethics procedures, and they, you know, talk through the usual things about, you know, respect and beneficence and all of that kind of stuff. But the Pacific cultural permissions that you've talked about are a crucial part of doing ethical research with Pacific communities, but they're not part of our forms. Why not? Why? How and why can we improve on that? Since it's, you know, doing research in the Pacific, it's what we do. You know, Fed and I have worked together, and it's, of course, like, we know to do that, but it's not part of our formal ethics procedures. But perhaps it should be. So just a sort of comment question posed to you. Thanks.
Anyone want to touch on that? I mean, I think also as academic leaders, it's part of our responsibility to tell our ethics bodies, because they don't get it, I think is probably true. And I think, you know, Pani could speak to even our ethics bodies or our promotion bodies within university, knowing what to do with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander applicants or research, and probably the same in the Pacific. And so it behooves us to actually help explain to them and change their practices, because ethics bodies are not fixed entities. And I think we can do better. And some of these methods we're talking about and approaches are not just of validity in Australia, or not just in the Pacific, but in anywhere we'd be working, whether it's in the CBD of Sydney or somewhere else in Australia. So I think that's a challenge for Griffith and UTS's ethics bodies and University of Sydney and many others. Thank you. Yeah.
I'll just quickly add, I think the short answer to your question is it should. And in understanding the progression of ethics bodies, identified ethics bodies here in Australia, there is an absence of that when it comes to Pacific research on Pacific communities in Australia and arguably in the region. And so there's a call to action there, I think. I think also recognising university processes lack cultural responsivity, and you know, that's another call to action to universities and organisations to be looking at grounded and responsive research process that includes ethics proposals.
Additional questions, reflections? Yep, thank you.
Thank you. I'm Evelina from the Australian National University. I am interested in reflections from everyone on the panel about working within and with communities that you have a prior relationship with and perhaps that you don't have a prior relationship with. There's been a lot of talk about free, prior, and continuous consent, which I totally agree with. There was some talk about spending a year working with community to actually understand how they are feeling the impacts of climate change. There's been a lot of talk during the rest of the day, at least in the sessions I've been in, regarding how we measure progress and how difficult it is, I guess, to have especially funders be flexible and open to the fact that you have to spend a year actually getting to know what the problems are as defined by the community when they're very outcomes driven, you know, in the short term. So that's a long-winded way of explaining the context around my interest in your reflections on how you balance the creation of new relationships with communities, the strengthening of relationships, and maintaining trust with those communities when you might have a 3-year project and in 1 year you just get to know what the problem is, and then you have to maybe explain that there's no more money, or that I guess just thinking about all of the complexity in that relationship-based structure in the type of work that you're all discussing. Thanks.
So does anyone have an answer to the fundamental flaw of development practice?
So I thank you for the question. It's a tough one. But I'll come back to this idea of relationality, right? Which is that it shouldn't be transactional in the sense of, you know, I'm here for a reason to get something done in a particular period of time. That it is really relational, and if you do take the time to invest in relationships, then, you know, there's the boundaries of the project are not, that doesn't dictate anything, right? It's your relationship with the people and the community and the place, and so if that relationship is genuine, then it will last, and that's the importance of, you know, long-term relationships, is that it doesn't matter that my funding has run out, because I'm still going to be working with you, and we're going to work together on something, and it's not dictated by the donor, it's not dictated by the KPIs or anything. It's dictated by the depth of your relationship with the person and the place. And there was a question this morning about how do we change the way in which aid is delivered and that relationship with those people. And I just give the example of my friend, the global ambassador for health in Australia, Lucas Dutoka, and we took him to Fiji, and we went and sat in the village, and we drank kava, and we spent time in the villages there, and I think that has helped to change the way in which he has viewed the work and the place, because he is more of the place now. And so I think embedding people for longer periods of times in the places is a fundamental way in which to change people's view, so that they can genuinely start to form relationships.
There you go. Okay. Yeah, it's a very tough question, and I have to say that feeling of unfinished business when funding gets to the end and you have engaged and the relationship is going on and there's potentially expectations. It's difficult when it's not possible. So what we've trying to do is to identify outcomes that can still be produced within the scope of the funding. So engaging with young people, for example, we would love to have the funding to bring their ideas to life, for example, because they shared things that could be actually implemented. We don't have the funding now to do that. So what we've done is we've given them an opportunity to pitch their ideas to a research conference. So it's not a finality. It's not the end of the process, but at least this is something. We try as well to have an outcome in writing, for example. Could be a one-pager about the experiences or the outcome of the work we've done. Co-authored by the young people interested in doing that and the researchers. And another thing is developing methodologies that some of them are not expensive and can be shared easily. So even when we're not there anymore, the methodologies can be utilized and implemented. I know it doesn't completely answer the question, but this is some strategies we've put in place. Yeah.
I'll just say one other thing, just also to have funding at the end of the project to be able to go back to the communities, because that's often the challenge. So you just have to be nimble to make sure that, you know, there's some funding allocated at the end. And that's something we did. We, you know, printed posters and made sure we visited all of the communities. But we also, through our collaborators at the University of South Pacific, they engaged their students, which was really important too, because often the students could speak the right dialogue in the areas that we were in. So they have maintained those connections as well beyond the life of the project. And those researchers have gone on to do higher degree research as well in that area. So that's another opportunity to keep that longer term relationship going.
If I can add, some of the students who had like 15 years old, who had absolutely no idea of what research was, at the end were like, oh, maybe this is something I would consider. I was like, oh, this is a good outcome.
Thank you. I've got a question. I'll just make the point. Everyone's talked about doing it with the relationships in the Pacific, but I think we also, particularly those of us who have been around a while, also have a responsibility to go to the DFATs and the funders and others and to tell them how they should be doing development practice. Because, you know, DFAT came out with a locally led development policy or guideline, which is soft. It's weak. It's engage a little bit in locally led development by talking to some people. It's not about the stuff we're talking about. It's not about saying it takes 5, 6, 7, 10 years, and it's about relationships, and it's about engagement, and it's about handing over some of this power, not to Australian universities, but to our partners in the region, and we've been changing the way that we talk to DFAT. And that's easier for me to do because I'm of a certain age. At the beginning of my career, I probably wouldn't have had the courage to say that to my one source of funding. Now I'm at a position where I can say that, and I do say that. So I'm not saying it's for everybody in this room to do, but for those of us who are of a certain vintage, thank you, it's something we have to do because we have to make that voice heard, and we need to explain that we're not going to do development in a bad way just to accept funding. It's just not the way we're going to practice. There's a question there.
Is it? Okay.
Jenny Ann Toribio from Veterinary Science at the University of Sydney. I'm very pleased to hear you talk about students and the role of local students. I'm wondering also when we talk about long-term relationships with communities in different countries and also then understanding within Australia about that, what the role of things like volunteers, so Australian volunteers or Australian students or student and researcher exchange and community leader exchange or programs. If you could speak to those sort of avenues for building the partnerships we're talking about.
Okay, I go first. It's a very interesting question. Thank you. So what I've done once, just before COVID, so we didn't get a chance to do it again, but we had some seed funding to have a group of students from the University of Sydney traveling to New Caledonia and working on project proposed by the Noumea Medipol, which is the big hospital on site. And so our students were supposed to work as a team with students from the University of New Caledonia and to bring this conversation together and really try to maybe not answer, provide a solution, but reflect and think about potential solution on these local problems. It was an amazing experience for everybody who got the chance to be involved. But I think that from my side, if I have to criticize what I've done, students needed to be better prepared to what to expect and all of the methodologies we talked about. So I think we didn't allow enough time at the beginning to really prepare students to the different methodologies, to how it's going to look like, to the conversations, to the culture, to the language. I think that would be amazing because young people together, they really want to have a voice, they go along together, they have differences, but a lot in common. But it needs to be well framed and thought through.
And if I could add, the intention is also quite important behind that exchange and who is being involved in that exchange. I think as someone who's grown up in the diaspora, there is a large group of community who live in Australia and who would be quite open to those kinds of student exchanges back to, or repatriation, if I can use that word, back to the islands, where they can connect with culture and connect with their Pacific identity. So I'd see there to be a strong appetite in Pacific communities in Australia. I do think it's important because these exchange programs have existed and continue to exist in the Pacific, medical programs, sending medical students over, and DFAT-funded fellowships have been in existence. So I think there is a history of exchange in the Pacific. I do think it's important to always query and question the motive and the intention behind that and who benefits from those exchanges, and ensuring that the capacity built remains within the region, remains within the Pacific, and that it isn't lost to places like Australia or elsewhere.
Was there another question, or let's take one more quickly and then we'll do a rapid response and then we'll have to wrap up and then lock you in the room for this dice thing that we'll figure out.
Thank you to the panelists. It's been a very interesting conversation. I think it's something we all grapple with, this kind of localization and how you do it. And there is an assumption, I think, that there are not other players in the room. We're talking about researchers in here, but there are lots of other players that are not interested. They just want the money and they're going to implement projects, whether they're good or not. It's going to be sort of locally led or not. They're going to do the consultation, but the donors will be pushing what their agenda is. And that's the space that, I'm sorry, my name is Michaela. I'm from CSIRO. And that's a lot of the spaces that we kind of work in, is in that applied interfacing with some of the other players, consultants, governments. And I don't know how you navigate that, because it's a huge privilege to be a researcher and to say we can go and we can spend time with communities and we have the funding for that. But that also minimizes the benefit to a lot of other communities because funding's only, limited. If we're saying we're going to do deep engagement, there are going to be a lot of people who are not going to benefit because there's not going to be heaps of money. The funding stream is declining. So I suppose it's really two questions. And how do you really navigate that? How do you navigate that there are other players that don't really care about this agenda? And how do you navigate the kind of reducing funding streams for us to do that work in a really meaningful and careful way that is very respectful?
Yeah, so that might be one we have to take offline because it's huge. I'll say for myself, a lot of the interventions we're talking about here are not hugely expensive in and of themselves. They're investments. It is also thinking about different funding streams. DFAT is not the only game in town, of course. There's lots of other funders. There are private sector organizations. There are foundations and so on. So, thinking differently. A lot of the interventions that we're doing in WISH, in Central Division in Fiji, are actually implemented by government. What we're doing is supporting communities to articulate to government what their needs are and priorities are. But the actual fencing or piping or protecting water sources is actually coming from government funds. But at the end of the day, we can't control what other people do. We can't control the whole universe. I think particularly given everything that's going on in the world, we can control who we are and who we commit ourselves to be as partners, as people in a relational environment. We can't control how the US or USAID or whoever else does act or doesn't act in these environments. And it's a huge question you're asking and a very good one, but I think at the end of the day, we can be true to who we are as individuals, as collaborators, and hopefully that starts to lead the way in terms of the expectations of what development practice looks like. Thank you very much, everyone, for the conversation, for the discussion. Please join me in thanking our panelists for sharing honestly and forthrightly from their own experience. We know it's been a long day, but we do want to take the opportunity to have this day one share and connect session. So one of the vision of the organizers was to give people a chance to now step back and reflect a little bit. So before we get into that, I just want to say, I hope you had a great day. It's not too late to come to dinner. If you want to continue on, please find someone at reception to help you purchase a ticket for great food conversation. Also, all monies goes to support Ukrainian causes. And please feel free to continue conversations at the bar. There will be a walking bus heading to dinner. So that's that.
And for those of you that are on the chairs, come and join where there's a gap at the table. I know you might be reluctant to do this exercise, but it's not going to be difficult and it's going to be fun, I think.
So I think we have one slide. It is one slide. Great.
Basically,
go ahead.
Shall I? Yeah, Joe, you go. I'm not quite sure. I'm just going to read off. Yeah. So basically, what the game is basically that each of you, who on the table has a birthday in July? Anyone got birthday in July? Right. So you're starting on this table. Anyone July birthday? August birthday? Oh, September birthday. Right. You're starting. This side? July birthday, August, September, October, November, December. Oh, well done. So you're starting. So everyone will be going to the left of the person that starts. And on this table, we've established, great, July. All right. So the premise of the game is that the person starts and you roll the dice and then you answer the question or you talk about the question that's the corresponding number on the dice and then pass it to your left. Absolutely. Any questions? On the tables. We've got half an hour. I just want to acknowledge, is anyone else online from the AV team? If you guys want to play online, I just suggest that one of you is facilitator and then just
This morning and anyway, but from the worker perspective, largely connection.
So grappling at Burnett was around the hierarchy of energy. Should perish.
Yes.
Was system.
And you can want to that.
Yeah.
To be honest, I noticed that the first time. Yeah, so I think it's like that is. It's sort of maybe a little bit. That's it.
Idea that came out? Not really, other than it's really hard. And defining what identity is. So it may not be global messages. Attention, needs,
Yes, sorry.
Other reasons, but at the same time, it's very contextual. All of the world out there from the speaker. The article by oh yeah. He wrote article on measuring success and I see that like 2 days ago. I connected with her on LinkedIn. I've never met her. No, she's very fantastic actually. Yeah. Yeah. So Queensland. Yeah. So cool. Yes. She wrote yeah. And I was really sad for that. And there was and despite the fact that evidence I read about those that are driving it, surprise, more effective, more efficient. By all the metrics that criteria more effective why are we saying
How much do people know the dom the soil risk of the world? Not trusting.
But it's geopolitics and region, there's so much in play. So like unpacking all of that. So it's really flags. It's like so much power. And I don't about letting like some people are going into geopolitical research and they've got to be interviewed, you've got to try and do things. If they don't fit in, like I don't tell you, don't report it because yeah, exactly. And I've been talking about either. So it's just where are the lessons being learned and actually share. It needs to be a conversation, just like failures.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe about me. Yeah.
Watch back. Yeah, trying to not let it story as the main Particularly in documents like and then when I went back to my boss, he was like, "Oh yeah, when they bring us to Australia, I think that's after you hear it, it's not good for us. So boss, tell them because it here starts space that yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Somebody else look at like that, so I don't know if you'll. The patient was also fully and aware the company. Now they're centralized. You take me out. I saw upstairs that was sitting on mom yesterday.
Okay. Right, you guys can carry the conversations on as long as you want, but I can let you off the hook as well, but enjoy. Thanks, everyone.